Hello and welcome to the Cancer Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Jim Foster, and on today's program, we have a wonderful guest with us whose story will hopefully provide a great deal of information and inspiration. He is a Hodgkin lymphoma survivor and is joining us today from Gqeberha, South Africa. Please join me in welcoming Xylan van Eyck to the show. Xylan, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you for having me, Jim, and well done with all the difficult pronunciations of my name and where I live.
Well, as you were mentioning to me before we hit the record button, Gqeberha is formerly known as Port Elizabeth for people that may know that name better. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. I can also give you the true pronunciation, which I can't expect you to know. A lot of locals don't even know it, which is Gqeberha. So there's a lot of clicks involved in the mouth. Gqeberha.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being here and taking time out of your busy day. And we're looking forward to having an opportunity to hear your story and sharing it with our audience. And if you're ready, let's get right to it. Sound good?
Yeah, let's jump in. Ready.
Okay. So Xylan, before we get into talking about your cancer journey, why don't you take a few moments and tell us about yourself and like where you're from and what your life was like prior to cancer entering your life.
So I was lucky enough to be born at the southern tip of Africa, along the southern coast of South Africa, Port Elizabeth, Gqeberha, very beautiful part of our wonderful continent, Africa. Grew up with a single parent, single mom in the household, working hard to look after me, an only child. Had a wonderful childhood, really. Can't complain about much, We played outdoors a lot, played sports in the street. Me as an outgoing kid, absolutely loved that. Grew up, still stayed in Port Elizabeth, completed school here. When I was in high school, radio was a big passion of mine. It became this big burning desire inside of me while still in school. It's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a broadcaster. So I'd come home after school in the afternoons and I'd sort of stop playing outside with friends and I'd more or less sit next to the radio, record my favorite presenters, copy things that they were saying, try to imitate it. And then, at the age of 16, when I had 3 years left of school, got a part-time job in one of the local radio stations and managed to fulfill that passion of mine. Lived in South Africa all of my life, lived in PE until I was 23 years old, because at that stage I'd worked in radio for 7 years. And the city that I live in is a smaller city. If you wanted to advance your career, you needed to go to the big city. And in my case, it was Johannesburg. That's where all the major television and radio stations were. And my career sort of took me there later on in life. I worked at national radio stations like 5FM, Kaya FM, sort of the biggest youth stations in South Africa, transitioned to television, worked for the biggest sports channel in Africa, SuperSport, managed to execute my passion over there, and life was good. I was a kid that grew up in the hood, managed to forge this career for himself in what was absolutely his passion and made it to the big city, got to work with a lot of South Africa's biggest celebrities. And as I say, life was good until at 26 years old, I got that diagnosis. Sort of an intro in a nutshell.
Sure. Okay. Wow. That sounds exciting. What was your overall health like in the years prior to cancer?
I've always been a cyclist. I started cycling when I was 16 years old. So I thought I knew what health was. I was active. So to me, it was a surprise, but it wasn't sort of an overnight thing, you know. I would say 2 to 3 years before my diagnosis, I started getting sick regularly. Every month I would have vomiting, I would get bronchitis, I got shingles a couple of times, and sort of didn't connect the dots, you know. It was only while my wife and I, being married for about 6 months at the time, we were traveling through Southeast Asia, and we were lying on this beautiful island in Thailand, Koh Phi Phi, absolutely idyllic. And I just wasn't well at all. We went back to our hotel room and I started vomiting blood. And I thought, okay, something's obviously seriously wrong here. So when we get back to South Africa in the next couple of days, I need to get this checked out. Got back to South Africa and I was feeling fine again. You know what we like, oh, I'm fine. I don't need to go to the doctor, you know. And then subsequently, I broke out in this rash from head to toe. I'd never had anything like it before. It was like consistent goosebumps, basically, that, you know, didn't go away. And I think that was my body's way of telling me, you need to get to the doctor. We had a really lovely local doctor who was very switched on, who loved getting to the bottom of problems. She really wanted to find out what the issue was with regards to the blood that I'd vomited out, and she suspected that I had an ulcer. So she then sent me for scans, and it was a junior radiologist that was doing a scan on me, looking for an ulcer, which they did find. But I knew that something was up when she returned a few minutes later with the senior radiologist, the owner of the practice, you know, to have a look, because they did find the ulcer, but subsequently they then found, as you mentioned, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which attacks the immune system. So they had found that several of my lymph nodes were enlarged several times, you know.
So when you did the scan, did they take a biopsy of a lymph node or anything like that, or did they just make this determination from the scan itself?
No, that's exactly right. So some of the enlarged lymph nodes the scan showed up was under my arms, under my armpits. So I went into hospital for one night and had a biopsy. The surgeon removed one of them, and they sent it for testing, and it subsequently came back positive for Hodgkin's lymphoma. I remember the next morning waking up in the hospital bed all groggy, and the surgeon showing me on his iPhone, you know, the size of the lymph node, how cool it is, how big it is, not supposed to be this big. And to me, it just looked disgusting. And I'm like, man, I don't know. I could never do your job. I'm not interested in seeing that disgusting lymph node.
So how did you feel the moment that your doctor told you that that you had Hodgkin lymphoma cancer?
I'm a very positive person, a very outgoing, optimistic person, which subsequently caught up with me later on in my cancer journey, which we can talk about a little later on. But the way it was presented to me was like, Hodgkin's lymphoma, if you're going to get a cancer, this is the cancer you want. You know, the cure rate, the response rate to treatment is very high. So don't go away. Don't write your will. You have nothing to worry about. You're young. We can treat this, you know. So to me, it was, okay, let's get this treatment sorted. Sounds good. Doesn't sound so bad.
Well, in full disclosure, that's the same type of cancer that I was diagnosed with. And I've heard similar comments from the doctors at that time. So what emotions did you experience? You mentioned that you were like ready to get started, but what was the initial emotions that you felt, you know, fear, anger, sadness, helplessness, anything like that?
I wasn't actually matured enough to deal with my emotions. I didn't have the tools at that stage to deal with my emotions. So I just went with this positive, we're going to get through this, we're going to push through, which obviously wasn't the wisest at the time, but I also believe at the time you need to do what you need to do to get through it. And that's probably what I needed, you know.
Sure.
I will say I was in a bit of shock, obviously 26 years old, Never had a history of that in my family. It was a big disruption in life. It was not something I was expecting when I was getting sick, and doctors were sending for scans. Cancer was certainly not what I was expecting to hear. So it was a shock. But as I say, at the time, I probably didn't deal with my emotions as well as I could. 2 years later, when I was still having treatment, then all of these emotions started. I couldn't suppress it anymore. It started boiling to the fore.
Now, were you with anyone, family or friends, when you found that out, and how did they deal with that?
Yeah, my wife was with me when we got the diagnosis. I never realized through this journey, how hard it is for the partner, because you're the patient, you're the one going through this physically, emotionally, spiritually. They're not going through it physically, but they are also experiencing the uncertainty of the future, what the outcome is going to be. And it wasn't like until I was in remission and we had these discussions that you start realizing how hard it is for people walking the journey along with you as well. But she was similar to me, we're healthy, the prognosis sounds good. We're healthy, the prognosis sounds good. Let's take it a day at a time and let's get through this. We had a good support system around us, family, friends that provided meals, helped with transport, try to take all those day-to-day chores off our plate. We both work very flexible hours, run our own business. So from that point of view, it was much easier being able to manage our time between treatments. But yeah, as I said, as I look back, I had to thank my wife several times because I also hadn't realized how hard it was for her.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you had a great support network. Now, you were able to get the treatments in the town that you lived in at the time, or did you have to travel very far for treatments?
No, I was very lucky that I was able to get the treatment. We were living in Johannesburg at the time, and the private medical care is world class. I was very lucky to be on a very good medical aid system. So in 2 years, the bills racked up to millions, and I hardly had to pay for any of that. So that was amazing. I remember being at the hospital when you were there for chemo, chat to other patients, and they would fly in from places as far as Botswana, Zimbabwe, having to cross a border. And I just thought, man, I'm finding it difficult to drive the 15 kilometers from my house to the treatment room, because I was also struggling psychologically with the treatment. I don't know if you experience this or if other patients experience this, but as soon as I would arrive at the hospital for treatment, even before getting any treatment, the moment I'd smell the chemo room, I'd need to run to the toilets. I actually remember in the middle of treatment, I had an opportunity. I work in professional cycling, and I had an opportunity to go to Italy to visit the Tour of Italy, which is the second biggest race in the world after the Tour de France. And it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And I had 2-week breaks in between my chemo sessions. And I went to my doctor and I said, this opportunity has come up, can I go? And he's a cyclist, so he understood the enormity of it. And he said to me, sure thing, you can go. You need to be very careful because your immune system's compromised. But what I want you to do is, as soon as you get back into the country, I want you to come straight from the airport, come and see me so I can do a checkup. When I got back from the airport, got to his office, there was no one around. It was late in the afternoon. Most of the patients had left, but I wasn't going to get treatment. I was only going to see my doctor. But as soon as the nurse walked out that usually administered the chemotherapy to me, I saw her and I just ran to the loo and had to vomit. And it was just, they had a term for it, a psychological trauma term, which I can't remember now, but that was one of the fascinating things that I experienced on this journey.
Yeah, I experienced similar things as well. Smells. It's amazing how much your sense of smell brings up memories and things like that. like, for example, if I smell oxygen, like when you have an oxygen mask on, I still to that day, it takes me right back to the hospital and so forth. And much like you're saying with the chemo room smell, it's amazing how your mind reacts to that sense that we oftentimes just kind of take for granted.
It's incredible. Even now, I'll walk into a room somewhere completely random and I'll get a whiff of smell and I'll be like, that smells like the chemo room. And I have to deal with it and go, okay, you're not there. You're not getting chemo 7 years later, you know? And like you say, that smell just, brings back all those memories. And I think the body is just incredible in sort of remembering trauma, remembering what it went through and helping you regulate.
Sure. Now, were there side effects initially that you had to deal with? You mentioned the vomiting and nausea. Was there things like hair loss, anything like that you remember that affected you?
The hair loss was amazing because, as you can tell, I am bald. So my hair only grows back on the sides, but it didn't grow back during treatment, which was amazing. I didn't have to shave. I'm a very hairy person all over my body. I wasn't hairy anymore. One of the most beautiful things cancer gave me was that after radiation, the hair never came back under my arms. And that's been wonderful, not complaining. The psychological nausea, that was the biggest thing probably. One of the other things I went through in the first 6 months of chemo was obviously when you come back for chemo 2 months later, they do a test to see if your white blood cells has recovered enough in time to get the next round of chemo. And for me, every second time or so, it didn't. So two things were involved. The first thing is you leading up to going back to the hospital for chemo, you sort of psych yourself up, you talk yourself into it, you get yourself there, and then the disappointment of the bloods not being there, and you have to go back home and you have to do that all again 4 or 5 days later. But they would give you an injection to speed up the blood reproduction. And I would always feel that going up my back, there would always be this throbbing, pumping. As more and more blood was being made, I would physically feel it and wouldn't be able to sleep well. And that was one of the other things that I experienced.
I remember that, kind of a dull pain in your lower back while it was making...
Like a throbbing,
Yeah. While they were making new white blood cells. Now, you seem like a very positive, optimistic guy. I'm sure that played a big role in your cancer journey. What were some of the things you did to remain positive? Did you set goals for yourself? What were your dreams at the time?
I'm naturally the kind of person who wants to achieve his potential in life. If I look at where I grew up and the minimal opportunities I was afforded and where I've managed to get to in life, that sort of sums up my psyche in a nutshell. I believe I come from a world where the world is this small. My world became this big, and I wanted to get from my small world to that big world. The sky is the limits for me. Nothing is impossible. I've managed to travel the world. I've managed to live in a small, tiny town of Port Elizabeth, but have global clients, work on projects with clients in Europe and America, and get to fly there often and get to work with some of the best cyclists in the world who've, won the Illiges and the Tour de France and won stages. So for me, that was it. There was just no giving up, even though some days you did wonder, how am I going to make it through today? At a macro level, there was no giving up because I want to achieve my potential on this earth. There's so much more that I want to experience. And to me, cancer became a big part of my story, a big part of the journey, but it wasn't the be all and end all. It was a season in this journey.
Now, during your first course of treatments, you were told at one point that they thought you were just about through with it, and you had a setback. How did that occur?
Yeah, the initial diagnosis that I got of if you're going to have a cancer, this is the one to have, it's easily curable. That became very frustrating to me because the first round of chemo I had was 6 months. I then had scans, gave the body time to recover, had scans to see if it had worked. It didn't work. But my case also was never cut and dry. Even when I, 2 years later, eventually got into remission, it wasn't sort of like, oh, the cancer is gone, go and live your life. It was always like, it seems like the cancer is gone. We're pretty sure it's gone, but we're just going to hang around and check some more. And that was the case. So the first round of chemo I had 6 months, it didn't work. So that was disheartening, obviously. They then proposed I had a higher dose of chemotherapy, which was going to be 4 times in the hospital for 2 to 3 days at a time. Higher dose of chemo, killing the immune system. And then at the end of that, I'd have a month in hospital in isolation, where they did a stem cell transplant with my own stem cells. I ended up being in hospital for 22 days, I think, or 23 days in total. And the hardest thing for me was the positivity ran out by then, because the hardest thing I dealt with was my freedom being taken away from me. For me, my freedom means the world to me. It's why I run my own business, so I can manage my own time. It's why I love triathlon and cycling, because if I go out for a 200-kilometer bike ride, I'm out in the world. I'm free. I can go wherever I want. My bicycle can take me there. My time is my own. So with this isolation, which we subsequently have experienced again the last year and a bit with COVID, my freedom was taken away from me. And that mentally just caught up with me. And then some depression started creeping in. And then after that, again, I had a scan and was told there are still cancer cells around the arms left. So what they're going to do is radiate those, go to radiation and see if that does the trick. And radiation did do the trick. So it went from this is the easiest cancer to cure to 2 years of 3 spells of treatment where 2 of those spells I got told, unfortunately, the treatment didn't work. You need more treatment. So it was a tough 2 years. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't easy.
Sure. Now, I've got a question about radiation. I didn't have radiation. How was that? Did you go into, did you have to have how did you keep from moving around, and where did they radiate you? And how, can you explain a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so I had to go into hospital every day. I think it was about 2 weeks. Don't quote me on the exact days. These are just ballpark, but it was 2 weeks and I had a break in the middle. But the radiation was, compared to the chemotherapy, was actually completely amazing. They radiated from the chest up to above my neck. And I felt nothing. I would go in the morning, get radiation, and go about my day as normal. One morning we had a big launch of our professional cycling team, which ended up going to the Tour de France, which became the first African team to win, to be in professional cycling and win stages of the Tour de France. Anyway, this was at the beginning. We had our big launch at our title sponsor's head office. I was standing there in front of all of these people that had flown in all over the world hosting this event on the microphone, and I'd had radiation 2 hours before that. So the radiation didn't affect me that much, except for 2 days when it really affected my throat, and swallowing food was absolutely painful. I did not want to eat anything, any bit of swallowing, whether it was soup, whether it was solid food, it was just every swallow was excruciating. So I'm not sure if if during that days of radiation, they were focused on the neck and I got a heavier dose then. But in those 10 to 14 days I got radiated, that was the only pain I experienced. The rest of the time I felt absolutely nothing.
Did both chemotherapy and radiation affect your taste, your sense of taste, or was that affected by either?
I don't recall. I can't say that I'd been affected by taste. No, I maintained a good appetite throughout. Taste wasn't something that was taken away from me. The psychological nausea did play into it. If I was approaching the hospital, if I knew I was going that day, then I didn't feel like eating because I knew it was just all going to come up later again. But from a taste point of view, no, that wasn't affected too much.
And after the radiation, how did you learn that your cancer was in remission? Did your doctor tell you, or how did you find that out?
Correct, yeah. So I had a scan again. I think it was a PET scan. It's very murky. I had several CAT scans and PET scans throughout this process. The PET scan obviously is the one that's a lot more sensitive. There's a lot more preparation that goes into it. But yeah, I had a scan and the doctor gave me the results and said, radiation finally did the trick. But again, it wasn't as I mentioned, radiation did the trick, cancer's gone, you're in remission, go live your life. It's gone, but your case the last 2 years hasn't been cut and dry. So let's just keep monitoring it every 3 months. So you come in every 3 months and we just keep an eye on the situation. So I could sort of be happy and live my life for 3 months until it was check-in time, report card, okay, is the cancer still not there? But 3 months eventually became 6 months as the doctors got more comfortable with the time frame.
Do you do anything to kind of celebrate that anniversary or any of the anniversaries that you had to remember back, or?
I don't celebrate a particular day or date, but I can truly say that I have never taken a single day for granted since my cancer diagnosis. And while I was having the transplant in isolation for 22, 23 days, it's a promise I made to myself. I had these big windows in my hospital room overlooking the skyline of Johannesburg, and I said to myself, when I go out there again, the moment I get in that parking lot, the moment I can feel and taste outside, I'm making a promise to myself that I'm never going to take a single day for granted. And I can honestly say I have done that. I have done one full Ironman. Last week was my 7th half Ironman I've completed. I'm on this health journey where I've completely educated myself in terms of holistic health, in terms of nutrition, what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, and being fit and healthy to give my body, the best fighting chance. Beyond that, I can't do much. Beyond that, it's up to destiny. But I can truly say that I live life to the fullest. I've really focused on building my dream business, a business where I get to manage my time and affords me the time to chase my dreams and passions, whatever they might be at the time. But that is, instead of pinpointing a date as remembrance, we've made this our holistic lives. We have a house where we have that, I can't believe I get to live there feeling, we live next to a game reserve. And, people in Africa always say, oh, do you have lions in your backyard? We literally do have lions in our back garden because we share a boundary fence with the game reserve. So we have the lions roaring at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., waking us some mornings. We have rhinos sleeping right outside our bedroom. A couple of nights ago, we had 30 buffalo sleeping right outside our bedroom, sending our dogs nuts. But to me, that's what it's about. That's our life. It's a celebration of life. And this, I believe, is what cancer gave us. Because I remember the doctor that did the radiation, he said that usually it's when you get to about 40 that you start going, okay, what do I want my life to look like? I realize now that I'm not going to live forever. So what do I want out of life? But a trauma like cancer just moves that forward. So at 26, 27, 28 years old, you're going, what do I want my life to look like? And we've gone and we've built the life that we wanted.
Well, that sounds wonderful. What an inspiring story, and the power of a positive outlook has brought you. So I'm so happy for you. Before we wrap things up today, imagine that you're speaking to someone that just found out that they have cancer or suspecting that they have cancer. What would you like to say to them?
It's such a personal journey for everyone. And I'm very, very cautious with this question always, because as I say, I didn't handle it. I don't believe I had the tools to handle it in the most healthiest way mentally in the beginning. I had this positive, I'm going to make it through. And as I say, that's what I needed at the time. But I would have liked to be more mindful and accepted the disease, dealt with it, gone through the denial, worked through the denial, and then accepted and gone, okay, this has happened to me. And you do go, why me? You become a victim. You ask the world, so many billions of people on earth, why me? Why do I have to go through this? And I think I would have liked to be more mindful going through it, going through the hard questions, feeling what my body wants to feel, feeling what my mind wants to feel. As I said, years later, depression started setting in, and that's pretty much because I hadn't acknowledged the hard thing I'd been through for those 2 years, So my advice would be, it's not so much advice as observations through what I had gone through, because it's such a personal thing, but that would be just to be mindful. If you feel like today you have to cry today. If you feel like today you have to laugh today. If you're feeling good today and the joy is there, take it, but just acknowledge what you're feeling, and the body is such a powerful thing, and the mind is such a powerful thing as well. One of the professional cyclists at the time who had been through a very bad accident that had almost ended his career, said to me, the body always follows the mind, so don't forget to focus on the mind. Just as we exercise the body, we have to exercise the mind as well. So make sure on those days where we are struggling, where we are suffering, that the mind, it might be time for the mind to show up if we've trained it, to pull the body along and pull it through it.
Well, that's fantastic advice. That's tremendous. So I'm sure people want to learn more about you and some of your Ironman story and different things you're doing. Is there somewhere they can go to learn more about you and your story?
Yeah, social media is probably the best. I try to be as transparent as possible and share some of my journey there. Last weekend, I did a post with the 7th half Ironman that I had completed, and I didn't actually realize that the week before the race, I had a PET scan, and I got the all clear from my doctor, and it was 7 years that I'd been in remission. And the exact same week that I got the remission for 7 years, it was my 7th half Ironman that I completed, and that was a happy coincidence, and I was excited to share that with people. So yeah, I'm active on most of the platforms. You'll find me at Xylan van Eyck on Instagram. On Twitter, I'm Xylan, at Xylan VE. Facebook, Xylan van Eyck. As I say, I just try to share my story there, try to be as transparent as possible, try to help people along from this very real trauma that people like us have faced in this life.
Well, that's wonderful. And we'll have links to all of those resources that you mentioned down below in the show notes and description. It's just been a wonderful story that you have, Xylan, and just thank you so much for joining us here today. And you've been an amazing guest, and we just wish you the very best in the future.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thanks for having me. It's always a privilege to share this story, and I hope someone has managed to find some hope in it. So thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. And hopefully everyone listening can take away something of value from this interview. I know that I can. And it was just tremendous hearing your story. And for those of you out there, please remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. And we wish you the absolute best possible outcome with your cancer journey. So until next time, please take care, and we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.